Welcome back to the Tuxes Tomahawks podcast. I'm Adam Dorito, and I know we've changed this podcast up, for this year, obviously because I'm running for Congress. I thought that was a good idea. But today, I am really excited to bring this gentleman on, and some of you might know who he is. He was on Dark Saber season one. He is my former commander at the United States Air Force Academy. So for anyone who really wants to know what I was like as a young man, go listen to that episode on Dark Saber about leadership. And feel free to ask questions. But today, I wanted to bring him on to talk about the things he's been doing since he retired. He has written a book, The Dynamics of Terror and the Creation of Homegrown Terrorists. And I think it's such an important discussion, especially with all the division and everything that's been going on, and since the global war on terror ended, and how a lot of these models needed to change. So, Dr. Richard Hughbank, Major retired U.S. Army, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Hey, thank you, Adam. I appreciate you having me on and supporting this new project I'm working on. And it's always good to sit down and chat with you.
Yeah, so give a little bit of background. So for people who didn't listen to you on season one, what made you join the military, and kind of how did that entire career lead you up to writing this book?
Uh, Really simple. I grew up in a military family. My father was in the Army. He served his original 3 years during the Vietnam War and did a couple of tours. And then he was a reservist for about 10 years after that, Reserve and National Guard. So while I didn't grow up jumping from Army post to Army post, I still grew up in that type of mentality. His father's a retired Marine Sergeant Major, and my great grandfather, an Army corporal as well. All of us in consecutive combat with each generation. So I really didn't even care for that culture. It was very strict, and I'm not saying I was a bad kid, but it was just something I didn't want to be a part of as an adult. And my father kind of pushed it as I was leaving high school. So I tried to go to college at a community college, and I failed miserably. And it's just I don't know how to explain it. I get maybe I wasn't mature enough. Maybe life was coming at me too fast. But after about a year, 2 semesters, and like I said, failing most of my classes or dropping them, I went to my grandfather and said, "Hey, I think I want to go in the military." And what I was looking for was the GI Bill.
Mhm.
And back then, the GI Bill was a $1,200 investment, and you've got 12,400 in return, and that was a lot of money back in 1987. So my intent was to go in 4 years strictly to get money to go to college and get out. Well, I got stationed overseas, and I was not stateside to look for jobs and interviews, so I was convinced by my NCO to re-up again, and I did another 4 year hitch. Eventually made it back to the States, and I made it back home to Texas, and I went through a divorce with my high school sweetheart, and things just kind of did a 180. But in the middle of all that, I was going back to college again, and I ran into an Army ROTC captain who was the recruiter for the program on campus. He gave me his card, said, "Come by and visit." So a couple weeks later, I did apply for a scholarship and got it. So at that point, I ETS'd from the Air Force, got a reserve Army ID card for 21 months while I was in college, and then I commissioned in 96. And my career ended in 1 September of '09 after going through a military medical evaluation board. And I fought for that with that against that for about 18 months and eventually lost the battle. I was injured, mostly my back, and that's why I was boarded out of the Army. So then I had to reinvent myself, and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. So I became a government contractor. Someone reached out to me while I was on terminal leave and said, "Hey, somebody referred you. Is this what you're interested in?" So I went back to Afghanistan. Actually, my very first day as a civilian, I was back in country, and they were paying me double what I made in the Army, and it seemed like a good fit. Came home, and my wife Jennifer said, "Hey, it was one thing when the Army sent you; it's another thing when you voluntarily go
Yeah.
overseas."
Yeah.
So I we had a running joke toward the end of my career is that, man, I really dread retiring because then I got to get an adult job. That's how the Army was just so much fun for me. And I'm not saying there weren't highs and lows, but I just had so much fun in the Army, and it just
Yeah.
didn't seem like work. And it was more of a career, a way of life than it was a job for me. And I think it is for most people who make it a career. So she used my joke back at me, threw it in my face, and said, "It's time for you to find an adult job, a real job." And we went through it. And one of the things I loved most about the Army was I really enjoyed training soldiers. I loved it when all of a sudden you saw that aha moment in their eyes. They got big, a little smile, acknowledgement that they understood what they were doing.
Hmm.
So the closest thing to that is teaching. And of course, as you know, I got a chance to teach a little bit at West Point, teach a little bit at the Air Force Academy, became an adjunct professor, and teaching really interested me. So I went and started my doctorate and started teaching full time as a graduate professor of Homeland Security Studies. Did that for about 7 years. Decided teaching wasn't what I was put on this earth for. I really wasn't moving the needle the way I'd hoped to. A lot of politics. Um, for the most part, I'm apolitical. And I got no problem saying I lean to the right and I vote Republican, but I don't go around and wear my politics on my sleeve, and I don't use the political lens to judge people or their actions or words. But on a university, yeah, that's pretty heavy. When you get a bunch of people who think they're smart in one room with a lot of letters in front of them behind their name,
Hmm.
that could be frustrating. In the Army, I could handle that. In academia, I didn't handle it well at all. So I ended up walking away from that. Retired for 2.5 years, had a couple of spine surgeries, which was, a part of the injuries that forced me out of the Army, and got my head screwed on tight, even psychologically. I did back then, it was identified, I still have today, some mental health issues, PTSD primarily, and I actually started getting help for that. And my wife held my hand through that. She was the one that opened my eyes and said, "You're not the same person." 20 years later, and it was just not a good thing for either one of us. So both psychologically and physically, I got a tune up. Went back to work for the government for 4 years. And then I had other health issues, had a third spine surgery. But then I started having some heart and lung issues. And the doctor says, really, he says, you got to get out of this elevation. He thought that the elevation was really hurting my body after about 17 years of being in Colorado.
Hmm.
So after a major issue that hospitalized me, we came out of that with another warning from my specialist saying, you got to go. So about 3 weeks later, our house went on the market. We sold it about 4 months later. I retired completely out of U.S. Space Command on the Joint Staff, which was a wonderful job, great people, great experience for an old soldier. And we moved back home to Texas. Been here a little over 2 years, and I've been retired again. And I was feeling a little lost again. I couldn't find my stride. I was watching TV, sitting on the couch, barely changing into clothes to leave the house. And I had an opportunity to write my last book. When the moment chose me, the day ISIS came to Garland, Texas.
Hmm.
And that event was relevant to me for two reasons. One, my background in terrorism. What that event ended up being was the first ISIS inspired attack in the United States in 2015.
Yeah, which a lot of people don't remember that either.
Exactly. Well, most people didn't know about this simply because nothing was ever released from the case. So
Nope.
there was a five terrorist cell. Two of them were the attackers. One was the recruiter. The others were indicted and convicted of conspiracy, providing weapons, providing training, support to terrorism, in other words.
Hmm.
And the two that actually attacked, Simpson and Sufi, were out of Arizona. They drove all the way from Arizona to Garland, Texas. There was a draw the Prophet Muhammad contest. And in
Yep.
Islam, especially on the Sunni side of beliefs, which is the majority of Islam, depicting the Prophet Muhammad in any art form is just sacrilegious.
Right.
And they have been known, there are cases across the entire world of people being killed for doing just that. As a matter of fact, just before, like a week, maybe 2 weeks before the May 2015 attack in Garland, there was a Charlie Hebdo was a newspaper in Paris, and ISIS members claimed to be ISIS went in and killed several people.
Yep, I remember that.
So that was fresh on law enforcement's mind as this event was right on the doorstep in their city. So the book was important to me, one, because it was a historical event, ISIS, and something that I studied for a while. And the other was the Garland Police Department, actually the entire first responder community, and not just there, their sister cities were supporting this event, planning for the worst, hoping for the best. And they did get the worst. And Simpson and Sufi drove all the way from Arizona straight to Garland, Texas, pulled up to the event center in a driveway where a police officer, Craig Stevens, who co-authored the book with me, and a school district security guard who was unarmed were sitting in a driveway for VIP only to get up to the main event. Right as the event was released, everybody was leaving, and a portion of them were out in the main parking lot when Simpson and Sufi pulled up. They got out of their sedan and both unleashed 37 rounds from fully automatic AKs.
Hmm.
Officer Stevens, in the open, drew his sidearm, a Glock 21 45 caliber, and started engaging, moving toward them. At this time, he had 37 years on the force. He ended up serving 40 as an officer. And his training kicked in, and he shot both terrorists, killing the passenger and wounding the driver pretty bad. SWAT was there within a matter of seconds, and four SWAT members engaged the driver, and the event was over. We're talking a 15 to 20-second firefight. And
Which with a Glock 21 and a 45 caliber weapon, I don't think people understand that's actually pretty impressive. You know what I mean?
it's
It's a
very impressive.
short range pistol, larger caliber, and if anyone, I mean anyone who shoots knows this, pistol work requires a lot more training than rifle work. You know what I
That's
mean?
correct.
You know, so
Yeah. A pistol has to be a part of your body, an extension of your arm.
100%.
And oddly enough, he spent the majority of his career as a motorcycle cop. So he was never trained with a patrol rifle.
Hmm.
Out of all the police officers that were posted that day, he was the only one without a patrol rifle, an AR rifle,
Hmm.
because he was never certified in it. So he was the only one carrying just a pistol.
Yeah.
And equally important to me is his training kicking in. We talk about that in the Army a lot. It's muscle memory. And he didn't just go to the range, once a year to qualify. He trained,
Hmm.
and he trained real world tactics. And Officer Stevens is a very religious man. And of course, he gives credit to God for everything that happened on that day. It was meant to be. He was meant to survive. He wasn't injured at all in the process, which is a miracle in and of itself. And I, on the other hand, being a little more pragmatic, relate that to his training, muscle memory, and just the fact that he had the moxie to move toward the threat instead of running away from it
Yeah,
or trying to find a hiding spot.
which is what we see in a lot of these, things that have happened in the US recently. Some police officers
Yes,
aren't as trained and they didn't do that constant, pistol engagement training or reacting to contact training, especially what we do in the Army, right? So, it's good to see that that effective training led to the suppression of that terrorist event versus it being exponentially worse.
that's exactly right. And Uvalde is a good case
Exactly.
study, real world.
Yep.
Matter of fact, I just read an article last night how one of the officers that went through trial was found not guilty for running away or not appropriately handling the gunfire in the class. But I would argue that what we're talking about there is human nature.
Hmm.
So fast forward to my current book. The first edition was written 15 years ago this month, January of 2011, it was published. I started it back in '07 when I was an AOC at the
Hmm.
Academy, and I was writing it, and I realized that the big question of the book was, who are these entities we call terrorists? That was my job in the Army, to understand my new enemy. Spent 14 years studying Cold War and my enemies, Russia, North Korea, China. And all of a sudden, now we had this enemy we called a terrorist. And even though I'd been in country in Afghanistan twice and spent a lot of personal time, we captured over 600 Al Qaeda Taliban and sent them to Guantanamo Bay when it opened. So I had a lot of up close and personal experience with terrorists,
Hmm.
but I still didn't understand them. So this book was, who are these individuals? What motivates them? What drives them? And that was the purpose of the first book. So there was a ton of psychology. And the title of the book is The Dynamics of Terror and Creation of Homegrown Terrorists. So I called up an old professor from a master's degree I got in counseling, which was a criteria for working at the two service academies, West Point and Air Force. And he became a friend and a mentor. And I said, hey, I want to write this book, but you're the psychology expert, you're the counselor full time. You want to help me co author this? He said, yes. What he didn't tell me, and what I later found, was he had no desire to research and write. So what he did
Yeah.
was he went out and recruited seven, eight, nine other people to write various chapters. So this book became an anthology, a collection of writings from different professionals.
Okay.
And these were smart people, and I'm sure they've been in the field counseling or whatever their professions were for the past 13 plus years, 15 years. And I really was proud of the book. And then I got a couple of book reviews and a few other comments. And basically, what they were saying is that the book was an anthology and it read like one. It read like nine different voices, none of them cohesive. There was no theme. And it really broke my heart. But 15 years later, I can look back and say, yeah, something I was proud of really fell short. And it was nobody's fault but mine as the editor. But
Hmm.
I didn't have the experience. Since then, I worked on my doctorate, wrote a dissertation, have published many, many more times. And now I was at a place in my career and I said, after I wrote When the Moment Chose Me with Officer Stevens, a fire was lit again and it gave me something to do. It gave me a different purpose. And I don't know if it's because I'm retired Army or the way I was raised or a combination of both, but I needed a reason to get out of bed a little bit professionally, even though I don't work. I mean, my family is great and doing things around the house is great, but I didn't have something just for me. And working on this book kind of lit a fire again. So I decided to write a second edition to the first book. So, what makes a second edition worthy of spending your money on, and what's different? A lot of times I see just changes in introductions. I see maybe a new chapter added, maybe a couple paragraphs changed here and there in a few chapters, and they say, "Hey, new book. Let me double down and make some more money." I didn't do that. I kept nine of the original 10 chapters, and I didn't solicit any help from any of the other co-authors,
Yeah.
mostly because I don't know who they are, how to reach them. I've never met them. And Anthony Niosi, who was the glue of this entire project, unfortunately, my friend and mentor passed away last year due to cancer. So every time an event happened out there, he would call me up and say, "Hey, Richard, our book is still very relevant." And he was very proud of it. And so I kind of wanted to do this for him as well. So I kept nine of the original chapters. And what did I delete? We peppered the book with active shooter stuff as well, because that was starting to be on the news and becoming a big to-do thing in our society, even back then. And I had a whole chapter on it. So I eliminated that chapter, kept the nine, rearranged the order of them, took out anything that referenced active shooter and focused solely on the title of the book. Then I rewrote six, or not rewrote, I created six new chapters. So it went from 10 down to nine, back up to 15. And one of the chapters was using different models on how do you create a terrorist. You know, what happens when ordinary people like you and I all of a sudden pick up a cause, that cause being terrorism, which every definition speaks to this out there. Terrorism is motivated either politically or religiously.
Hmm.
And that's the difference between a terrorist and your garden variety criminal. What separates a man who breaks into uh, a church and kills 6 people and wounds 20 others from Simpson and Sufi and Garland? Their motivation. That's the definition of a terrorist. So we focused on that. And as I'm getting these other three models that are excellent models and I've used in the past, I'm starting to explain them and I'm working them out in that chapter after I post the models. And as I'm doing this, and I'm not talking in the same day, I'm talking over the course of a week or two, I start thinking that I'm creating my own model and it's evolving from theirs. So then I looked harder and harder. I touched it up. And over time, I said, now I got to take this and put it into a table and make it very simple because I don't want this book just to be for academics, students, and professionals. I want my next door neighbor to pick it up. I want grandma. I want an 18-year-old young person, and I
And I
want
think
them to
that's
understand it.
I think that's important for people to understand because, when people think of terrorism, especially with the last 20 years in the global war on terror, we think, well, these people are just in Afghanistan and Iraq or the Middle East, and they're a bunch of guys wearing hijabs and, women wearing hijabs and then strapping vests to themselves and blowing themselves up. But you focus a lot on homegrown terrorism, and you see multiple events that have happened over the United States over probably the last decade, and, like the Pulse nightclub shooting and things
Sure.
like that. And I think it's something that people negate, right? Because you said specifically that like terrorism is motivated politically or religiously. And you're seeing a lot of these groups and these organizations in the United States even now, whether it's burning down police stations or attacking officers or vice versa, you're seeing this model evolve from something when you and I have served in the army that is completely different from what we were taught, right?
Exactly.
And I think that's why so explain this new model. Explain this new model of terrorism that you have developed because I think that's really important for people to understand of what we thought we knew for the last 20 years.
Okay. Simply stated in a linear equation, the theory I am postulating is psychology plus sociology equals radicalized extremism. And it's that path from being someone like you and I to being someone like the Orlando shooting, the San Bernardino shooting, the Garland, Texas shooting, and what gets them from point A to point B.
Hmm.
And the psychological piece of that puzzle is what I call fracture, and it's a break in simple terms, a psychological break. And I'm not talking something major to where something impacts someone, they immediately pick up a gun and they kill people. This is a process,
Hmm.
and it could be a simple break. Matter of fact, I've got 6 stages. The first two talk about different levels of fracture. And then you hit the area that I call drift, and we all drift. We drift if we lose our job or we're unhappy with our jobs. I had friends in their 40s try to redefine who they were and take on different careers. You see uh, professionals going back to grad school in their mid late 40s to find a new way in their job with different education. You find those of us that retire from the military in their late 30s, early mid 40s, having to redefine who we are. So we all drift. But the big thing that I speak to is the last couple of stages of fusion. And fusion is about finding a new anchor. And anchors are something we talk about in psychology, and we all have those too. And an anchor is just an influence in our life. I almost said a positive influence because that's what we look for in day-to-day lives. Unfortunately, those who become a terrorist, as defined by this book, they find a negative anchor.
Mm.
But they don't see it as that. They see it as an affirmation of everything that they're angry with in life.
So they become tunnel visioned in these things. And
Yes.
I think to kind of use this like a modern example to go with this model is like, for example, like COVID-19, right? people lost their jobs, people became isolated, and then they started to drift. They started believing in, like you said, political ideologies, no matter what spectrum you saw in the United States. And then you saw, some of these people binding together with that centralized idea. And I think a contributing factor to that, which I think you talk about in your book, is the influence of social media and these algorithms that people are paying attention to that really coexists and parallels this model that you're talking about.
You're exactly right. And a real world example, I use case studies, and I think case studies are important. We used it in the Army in particularly, and I'm sure other branches did too. And here's a real world combat scenario done by a leader, and you break it down with your junior leaders that was this action ethical? Was this person a good leader? And if the action wasn't ethical, what they did afterwards, did the ends justify the means? And they're great exercises. And the answer is you don't know the true answer until you're in that position. But we just
Yeah.
try to provide those examples, and it's situational context at that moment. But for instance, there was two assassination attempts against our current president.
Hmm.
Okay, one when he was on the trail for election, and actually maybe both of them. The second one may not have been. It was in Florida at the golf course, I
Oh no,
believe. But
he was still on the trail then.
okay,
Yep, yep. So the
so
first one was Butler, Pennsylvania, and the next one was at the golf course in Florida.
okay,
Yep,
so those two, because they were political in nature, define them as terrorism under our U.S. government and by just about any academic definition.
yep,
So in order to be able to use that as a case study in my book, there would have to be something like they posted a manifesto. During the investigation, law enforcement found different chat rooms they were in. So you really got to understand what was in their head. And you only know that through their own words. Otherwise, you're just guessing. So I
yeah.
try to use that type of stuff, transcripts in courts, comments that were made into the paper, that things of that nature. So COVID isolated people and it did some bad things to
Hmm.
us, especially the younger groups. And
Absolutely.
that's what's important about my model is its versatility. And I'm not saying I'm there yet. I'm still working on it. But ideally, my model will be able to be used against both genders, the spectrum of male and female, against all ages, youth,
Mm.
adolescents, adults, young adults, adults my age, and
And
equally as
ideologies too,
important,
right? Because we
across.
always think it's always the Middle Eastern guys or the guys in Pakistan or Afghanistan, but like if you take these concepts we're talking about, this fracture, drift, and everything else, you can apply that pretty much universally anywhere and apply that same model in order to try to decipher what's actually going on in these groups.
Bingo, which is leading to what I hope I'm creating is called the Dynamics of Terror series. So the first one is the creation of homegrown terrorists.
Hmm.
My next one, which I will allude to in this book, is the creation of active shooters. So I got my base model. This is what X looks like generically. And then as I started looking at this, I said, there's three columns. And the first two deal with the first one's the stages, the six stages. The second one deals with my theories of fracture, drift, fusion. But the third column specifically approaches core psychological effects. And that's where my argument is that this model can survive the test of time and go across all of these spectrums that we spoke to. And I'm going to try to prove that by my next book is going to be The Dynamics of Terror and Creation of Active Shooters and make the argument in a model, the core psychological effects, that variant that differs from being a homegrown terrorist. And then the next book is probably going to be female extremists and how now I'm talking women and their psychological impacts. And you could do it with uh, serial killers, which necessarily isn't popular today, but something that has been throughout our history and changed the FBI and created the behavioral science unit that they have.
Yep.
Serial rapists. It could be what creates someone that becomes a white nationalist. The FBI has databases of all these active shooters. And a perfect example is the active shooter in Walmart in El Paso
Yep.
4 or 5 years ago. His manifesto clearly stated that he was going to kill all the illegal Mexicans coming into the United States. So the FBI label that, tag that as a white nationalist, a white supremacist attitude as an active shooter. So now I got to look at, well, the mindset of an active shooter, but more importantly, what takes someone to believe that their race, in this case, the white race, is superior and that we need to cleanse our neighborhoods of anybody that's not white and approach that psychological, those core psychological effects that made that individual in El Paso believe that he needed to kill all illegal Mexicans, and that is his language.
And
So,
it's interesting because you hear that word white nationalist being put out a lot, and I think people think like, oh, it's just this group of people, but your model accounts for all ages, genders, and backgrounds equally, and the model can apply to all of them versus just pigeonholing terrorism into one specific group, whether it's Islamic extremists or white nationalists or murderers or whatever else. Like it kind of that's what's interesting about this is that it accounts for each one of those individual groups. So like how does it account for all that in your model?
and that's where the changes in the core psychological effects, that third column. My argument is uh, our society, our criminal justice system, our psychology experts show that there's a difference between someone who wants to become a terrorist vice someone who becomes a serial rapist or a serial killer
Hmm.
vice someone who wants to kill somebody that is not, pardon me, of their race. And they they all start out in the same place for the most part, but the drift changes, and it changes based off age. I make an argument that younger people can drift a lot longer, primarily because they don't have a base identity. They're not
Mm,
quite sure who they are, so they don't know what they're trying to attach to or how to redefine something that has yet to be defined.
that's really
But
important.
adults, yes, adults like us, I would tell you that my foundation is grounded. I know who I am. But if all of a sudden, and I'm a retired soldier, I am retired law enforcement. But if all of a sudden one day something happened and I went and attacked an army post or went and started killing law enforcement officers in the streets, which we have seen over the past few years, something had to drastically break. And I would argue that my drift would have been much shorter than, say, a younger person, male or female, because I'm more defined in my thoughts and believe in who I am. So maybe it was law enforcement who broke into my house one night and mistreated me and my wife. And then all of a sudden, that was my breaking point. They violated the Constitution. They violated my rights. I'm a retired soldier. I'm a retired cop. How dare you? That drift would be very short.
So do you think people like us, like you're like the Gen X, I'm the millennial, like the older side of the millennial generation because I was born in the 80s too, but like do you think that and I think we've seen this in modern terrorist attacks, domestic terrorism attacks, is that our generations are less susceptible to drift because like we grew up without technology. We grew up without social media. We grew up with our parents telling us to respect law enforcement. We grew up in a much smaller, concentrated society where we relied on our neighbors as friends and everything else. And we didn't know much about the world unless we read it in like a physical newspaper or we physically
Right.
saw it on the news. But like, do you think like these real world events? Because it's one thing you mentioned, like Garland, Texas, like you bring up these real world events, and all the models we were taught in the army is all hypothetical situations. Like if you see X, Y, Z, then A, B, C is going to happen. So I think that the younger generation is more susceptible to this drift because of the access to information in this thing we call a cell phone. I think this box is really, hurting our society. But why are you using all these real events as case studies versus hypotheticals?
You hit the nail on the head. Case studies cannot be beaten. I can take case study X, uh, Farouk in San Bernardino and his wife Malik, and I can look at what they've posted online. I can look at what they've said, what their attorneys have said, maybe even what that was said in court, and get an understanding of what's going on in their head. I don't have to speculate.
Mm,
I don't have to make something up.
right.
So, in order for me to use a case study, I really got to have some of that inside information. I could say, well, I think Farouk and San Bernardino was thinking like this, or based off what I read, maybe that's how this drift and fusion occurred for him. Same thing with Major Nadal Hassan in
Right.
November of '09 at Fort Hood.
Yeah.
Uh, that happened during President Obama's administration, and it was labeled a workplace violence event. And you could argue it's there. Also, an active shooter, no doubt. But under President Obama's administration, the word terrorism was not a great thing. And using Islamic terrorism in the same sentence was also forbidden for the
Right.
most
The whole
part in his
Islamophobia
administration.
movement and things like that.
Exactly. So it was not labeled what it truly was, and that was a terrorist attack on a military installation. My next door neighbor was 2 blocks away when this event occurred. He was friends with people that were killed and wounded in this event, and we've talked about it a little bit. But my my reason for this case study is there are plenty of things out there on what Major, well, no longer Major, now Mr. Hassan,
Hmm.
what he did. And what makes this even more incredible to me is he was a psychiatrist. He was an MD and a PhD in psychology, and that's what he did for a living. And based off everything that I've read, he basically his he was already drifting. His religion is Islam, him being an army soldier, trying to put in an officer to boot, trying to put all that together, and he was seriously drifting and for a while based off everything I've read. But the actual fusion point was when he got orders to deploy into Iraq or
Interesting.
Afghanistan.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
then I would argue that that is where he fused and he said, now I'm leaning with my religion. And I say my religion. I don't think the religion of Islam is evil. I believe certain individuals take it and twist it to turn it into their own personal vendetta. And that's what Hassan did. And he viewed it as X, and now he was being sent overseas to fight against his brothers in his religion, and he retaliated. That is my position on that case study, and I do mention him in the book.
So you mentioned this is interesting because you talk about like, Hassan did this and then, you had the President Trump assassination attempts and everything else. So do you think when people enter this model, this fracture and drift and everything, do you think that radicalization is inevitable? Like it's always going to happen guaranteed or can something else happen?
No, I do not believe that. I have 6 stages. I believe in the first five, which is the fracture drift fusion phases, that there are off ramps. It's not until the sixth and final stage, which I label as active violence. By
Hmm.
then, the genie's left the bottle, the bullets left the barrel. There's no stopping it. But this book isn't just about woe is us and everybody's evil.
Hmm.
It is about society is good. The difference between those who end up becoming terrorists and those who don't is about their anchors. And I'm going to say the solution is simple, but really it's very, very difficult. And the simple solution is in those first 5 stages, there are off ramps. So I define those off ramps as getting a different interaction, parents engaging, peers engaging, siblings, a teacher, a coach, even a cop, anybody, a principal, a counselor, to provide a counter narrative. So when it comes to the young folks, my argument is that they're being influenced more by the internet than they
Mm.
are by human beings. And I think that there's a great argument out there that both parents are working. The economy's tight. Money doesn't go as far as it used to. So both parents are working. So who is there at the house influencing their children?
Yeah.
If you look at Jose Padilla in the streets of Chicago, his mother divorced, working 2 or 3 jobs throughout his life. The gangs raised Jose Padilla. And when he turned 17, he decided being a gang member wasn't cool enough. He went to 3 different training camps, Al Qaeda training camps overseas. He was going to create a dirty bomb. We arrested him in O'Hare, Chicago O'Hare Airport, I think coming back from his third training camp, Al Qaeda training camp. And that is where the U.S. Patriot Act was truly tested in the court of law with
Right.
Jose Padilla. So, who's raising our kids? Is it the phone that they're carrying from the age of 7? Is it their tablet? Is it the video games they're playing? Screen time is much heavier today than it was when you and I were growing up,
I mean,
just because there's more options.
parents are raising their kids on iPads now, like as infants. It's crazy.
You
You
could
know,
you could make that argument.
and one thing you bring this up like about screen time and internet access. So Australia actually just enacted a ban on social media countrywide, right? And it's interesting. I think that's a drastic, and also I don't know how you do that. Like no one's under the age of 18 is allowed to use Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, due to their belief that it radicalizes things. But do you think that that's a preventative measure? Like you talk about these anchors and like having a positive family environment and good parents and good role models, but what else can be used to prevent terrorism other than like cutting off your social media access?
Well, our government has tried this. They're working with big tech,
Yeah.
and big tech has agreed to certain things like once we see keywords in a message forum or in a group, then we'll shut that down. Will deny access to this. And the language of keywords, and it all probably started with politics, to be honest with you, not necessarily trying to protect our young people, but just trying to eliminate freedom of speech to make sure both sides had it and things of that nature. And I think that's where the origins were. But big tech has been working with Congress of late to try to find a solution. And again, it sounds like an easy solution, but
But
really
it's pretty hard to implement.
it's very difficult. People argue the First Amendment. What Australia is doing, if that were to happen in the United States, it would violate the First Amendment because that's government interfering with our ability to communicate.
Yes.
However, if big tech does it as a private business, there's no violation of the First Amendment because that's not about the government anymore. That is big tech making a decision hand in hand with the government. But we're sitting here doing this interview. You could shut this interview down anytime. And if I were to go out and holler saying, hey, he violated my First Amendments because he didn't like what I was saying, he didn't agree with my politics or my beliefs on this book, there's really nothing to be said because we're two individuals. You didn't like what I was saying. It's your platform. You shut it down.
And this is a good topic because we saw so much of this, I think starting in 2016, right? You saw the first Trump election and then the 2020 election and 24. You I was a massive shift in how politics works in this country, in my opinion. Like it's nothing I've ever seen before in any presidential election before that. They were censoring things on like I think the Hunter Biden laptop's a perfect example of this. When the Hunter Biden laptop came out, it was censored from all platforms universally. And people are saying that big tech was altering the points of the election. But an interesting perspective on this is I actually listened to the entire interview of Hunter Biden on Sean Ryan for 6.5 hours. I had the flu that day, so I had nothing else better to do. And I'm like, I'm going to listen to Hunter Biden talk for 6.5 hours. Here we go. I actually have a completely different respect for the man after listening to that interview because it showed what had not been said for the last several years and how that technology was manipulating not only his personal life, but extraneous events after that, whether that was Trump supporters or everything involved in the election. And you could see how that censorship and lack or overuse of technology directly influenced how people felt. And it created more, in my opinion, more extremist ideologies within both political parties because of that interference. And I think it's caused a lot of issues in this country ever since, which is basically explained in how your fracture drift model is explained.
Sure, absolutely. And all of this comes down to, again, someone breaks psychologically somewhere. And again, I'm not talking a complete breakdown of put them in a straitjacket in a padded room and give them lithium. I'm talking about just the simplest of things that cause you to scratch your head and start questioning your beliefs. And then maybe that's compounded. So I show a couple of stages of this fusion.
Hmm.
And then once of this fracture, I'm sorry. And then once that fracture becomes a little more complete, the drift sets in. You're trying to do some research. You're trying to say, all right, well, I've thought X my whole life.
Mhm.
Now Y is a little more open to me.
Right.
And you see this with people changing what side of the aisle, pardon me, they are in politics. A lot of people just become independents nowadays and they openly talk about that, the more famous people.
It's a big
So,
factor in my congressional district, not where I'm running,
okay, there
right?
you
Like
go.
there's for a while it was like 50-50, blue on red. People left each other alone. People went to work and didn't, really think of things. Right. And then what happened was over the course of the election and how this district has shifted is that there's an extreme left component, there's an extreme right component, which are people you can't even talk to because they're never going to change their mind because they're not rational people. But then in the middle, like that's what has changed in Colorado so drastically in this example is that so many people have become unaffiliated that just want more rational decision making between these political ideologies. And for a lot of aspects, I respect those people, because they are removing themselves from the system, kind of like the off ramps in your model you're talking about. Like they
Right.
found something to off ramp themselves from political ideologies, which I give them a lot of credit for. But even still, whether it's the personal attacks against me in this campaign or whether it's, different policies going on, you're still seeing these people that are not being pulled back to the world of reality, as I would say. So,
Right. And one of the key things, words you said there was the extreme left and the extreme right. And
mhm.
that's what we're speaking to is extremism. People are going to be mad at something or disagree with something constantly. But to get to the point to where it becomes so extreme that they shift who they fundamentally are, fundamentally believe,
Yeah.
into morph it into something else. So you mentioned the internet and message boards and things like that. A couple of the new chapters, one of them is the algorithm of hate, and it's
Mhm.
speaking to getting online and I'm gonna get off this extreme stuff and violence and just something simple. For Christmas, I was looking for a gift for my wife, and after 31 plus years, that's not always an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
And I search X and I start going down different things. Well, X has three or four different variances, and you could get the big model, the little model, the powerful model, the expensive model, the cheap one. But what I noticed over time, and this is why I'm working on this book, is that all of a sudden I start getting pop-up ads, or I'm watching YouTube, and the commercials at YouTube are exactly what I had researched for my wife's Christmas present, still trying to use their algorithm to get me to buy something, to get
Thanks,
me to
Palantir.
believe in this product. Yeah.
Yeah.
So imagine doing that in my profession, researching terrorism. I start out
Yeah.
with
Your
tell
phone
me,
is just giving you
yeah,
advertisements for AK-47s.
it's- tell me about ISIS. Tell me about Simpson and Sufi from the Garland attack.
Mhm.
And depending on the words I use and how it takes me, I end up in some pretty dark places.
Yeah.
So imagine a younger person who's already disenchanted with life, angry at something, doing all this, and then you end up in a forum. And this is why I'm not on any social media platforms, because you get into a forum and that forum eventually just becomes a single voice.
Mhm.
They all hate X or they all love X. And if anybody comes in with a counter argument, a logical debate or illogical debate, they shun them, put them down, chastise them, and kick them out of that forum. So what you have now is in another chapter I call echo chambers.
Mhm.
You get some disenfranchised human being, especially a younger one, and they're in a forum with 30, 40, 100 people, and they're all saying, we hate X.
Mhm.
Now there's nobody out there to debate and plant a different seed. There's no off ramp. So that
Yeah, so
off
people just get
ramp,
this linear track and that's all they can think about and they can't differentiate between, well, I would say reality and what their personal views are on that.
well, they no longer have counter arguments
Hmm.
to reshape what they're thinking.
Yeah, it's that
It's
echo
all
chamber.
going in one direction.
Hmm.
And that becomes dangerous for all of us. And it's done a lot in culture. You and I have both been to basic training,
Hmm.
and they do that to us. In Air Force basic training, they called us rainbows the first day because we were from different parts of the country, maybe even different countries, different backgrounds, different upbringings, and then they shave our heads so we start to look like each other.
Hmm.
Then they shave all of our facial hair. Then they put us in a uniform that all looks the same. Then they put a name tag that all said U.S. Air Force. And the
Yep.
only personal identity we had was our name tag at that point. And they spent the next 6 to 8 weeks reshaping us, putting us in this isolated society to where we could all act, look, and speak like members of the United States Air Force.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to use that example because it's done everywhere. And it can be dangerous when you get people sitting alone at 2 in the morning in a dark room, staring at a screen for hours on end, and hearing the same evil rhetoric, harmful rhetoric.
Yeah.
So, where's the off ramp? My wife coming in and saying, "Hey, honey, put the computer away, come to bed." Next morning, "Hey, what were you looking at 3 in the morning on the internet?" Well, honey, I started researching my book and I got into this and I was in this forum and they were talking this. And that's when she says, "Hey, I've known you for 32 years. That's not who you are. What's going on?" That is a potential off ramp to break the cycle that I'm starting just by innocence of doing research. And it happens out there all the time. So you get, again, the key is extremism. It's one thing to think that one political side or the other is evil. It's another to pick up a gun and go kill someone or try to kill someone that is on the opposing political side. Just as an example, because that's happening in society today,
Hmm.
and I think people can relate to that type of example. Um, I don't think everybody's evil. I think everybody has the potential to be evil. I think that it's a
Yeah.
cycle and I discuss that cycle. I think the cycle can be broken, and we speak to that throughout the entire book.
So you what one when is your book, the second edition, going to get published?
Um, right now, I'm looking June-ish,
Okay.
into May, June, July.
So I mean, this is I can't wait to read the second edition. I'm really looking forward to it. So, but uh, what are you hoping that people get from the second edition of the Dynamics of Terror?
I want people to understand that radicalization can happen in anyone, regardless of age or gender or profession. I want people to realize that it is a cycle. And if there's a cycle, cycles can be interrupted, possibly even broken.
Hmm.
I want people to understand that it's dealing both with psychology, someone was hurt, somebody became broken, but it's also the sociological factors, the human interactions that help shape who they become over time.
Hmm.
I was a kid, I shoplifted from a convenience store a pack of, 25-cent pack of gum with baseball cards in it. My dad spanks me. That's bad. If you do this, this will happen. This is bad. Do not steal. That type of stuff. I got young nieces and nephews, and they like to fib. They're young, working into their early teens. And I know I'm talking over their head a little bit, but I was talking to my oldest nephew, who is a very young teenager, and I said, "Hey, listen, I'm going to use a word called honor. Honor and integrity. Those are the two things that no man can ever take from you. You can only give it away. And you give it away by telling these lies to me and your parents, or to all of us."
Hmm.
Now, that may be a little advanced for him, but at least I introduced something to him to think about. Well, wait a minute. I got to have some honor here. I got to be an honorable man. And maybe it's better to tell the truth. So that's an example of an off ramp for a very simple problem that everybody has. And I just want people to understand that it is a cycle. Sometimes it's a long cycle, sometimes it's a short cycle.
No, I mean this is great, and I think your book's going to be really important. I think even for the next generation of military leaders, because like I said, one, we have a lot of new officers, NCOs coming into the military now who don't even remember what 9/11 was, which is crazy to think about now. It is crazy to think about. There's people entering the military that don't know what 9/11 is. I experienced it on my deployment. I had a private who was like, "Why are we in the Middle East?" They were
Yeah.
asking like, "Do you know who Osama bin Laden was?" They're like, "Is that the guy in the DFAC?" I'm like, "No." Like, you know, but it's really important to reevaluate what we were taught for a long time and how that narrative and how those models are changing because the world is drastically changing very quickly. I think I'm getting old enough where I recognize that things are changing and I have to relearn a lot of things. And I think your book is going to be really important to start explaining that to the next generation of law enforcement leaders, community leaders, military leaders to start changing their thinking, and start recognizing some of these patterns so that maybe we can prevent more things from happening in the future. And I think it's going to be a great read. I'm really looking forward to this.
Well, I appreciate that. And I would hope that what you said is true, so much to the extent of here in where I live in my community. A couple months ago, the school district had a 13-year-old little girl stab a 12-year-old little girl and kill her in school.
That's insane.
Now, could that have been identified and redirected earlier? I don't know because I don't know the facts of the case.
Hmm.
But I would argue that teachers, if they were paying a little more attention and more importantly, knew what to look for.
Right.
I mean, teachers have a hard job as it is,
Hmm.
teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic. But then all of a sudden you say, wait a minute now, there's a little bit of babysitting and caregiving that's involved with this. And I'm not saying teachers don't do this, but to be able to take this book, which has a chapter of how schools influences and how bullying influences. And I mean, back in the day, PTA meetings, I remember my mom and dad just in a tizzy all day long to go to school just to talk to my different teachers, A, to see how I was doing academically,
Hmm.
and B, how I was doing emotionally. Was I playing well with others? Was I isolating myself in the cafeteria out at recess? Was I standing in a corner or socially interacting with both boys and girls? And how am I developing as a human being? And I don't know if that exists today. I don't have a youngster in school. But to be able to maybe take this book to the district superintendent or to the new principal or
Yeah.
to the chief of police or the sheriff and say, hey, if maybe one or two chapters in here, and maybe we could start creating a citywide model and start challenging people to pay more attention. Because in my day of school, you get in a fist fight after school. It was always after school.
Yeah.
And we get after school, we beat each other up, and then we dust each other off and we go play a game of kickball or soccer or whatever together. And it wasn't until toward the end of my time in high school that drugs were even introduced. It was X when it first came around my junior year. This is 85-ish. And the only weapon you may have seen on a rare occasion was a knife, not a gun. I mean, people felt they needed to protect themselves. They learned how to fight. They
Hmm.
didn't bring their father's gun or some gun they got from a friend or picked up in the gutter and take it to school in their backpack because they were so afraid of being bullied that
Hmm.
they had to protect themselves with a gun.
Hmm.
That just didn't happen when I went to school.
Yeah. No, I think it could change a lot of things. And that's what I'm looking for. I love books and ideas and things that like actually change stuff. It's not just people talking about random things for the sake of talking about things. I think what you're talking about in this book is so important for, like I said, military, law enforcement, community leaders, to really change that dynamic of thinking on the dynamics of terror. Because it's
Yeah.
not to be a pun on play on words there. It just kind of happened there. But so where can people connect with you, before the book comes out, or how can they get in contact with you, because I think this is something that people are going to want to talk about to you more just outside of me. So,
Okay. Well, my publisher is currently creating a website. I don't have the URL for it just yet. We are literally, I was talking to the guy building it last week, and That's where I'm going to have everything go to. I
Okay.
don't want it to go to my personal email. I'm fully prepared to engage even good debate. I
Mhm.
mean, I'm not saying that everything we wrote in this book is absolute. It's not written in stone, and we're not carrying it down from a mountaintop. It's theoretical in nature, based off both academic and professional experiences. And I encourage people to reach out and make some comments on the book, good, bad, or indifferent, and we go from there. And when the book comes out, it'll be online for sure, both Barnes and Noble and Amazon. It'll be in a few bookstores down the road. But I want people to understand something. None of the authors, especially me, are under the illusion that we're the next Stephen King or Brad Thor or Mark Greaney. I didn't do this to make money. We're academics, in my case, a scholar practitioner, and all I'm doing is trying to share my experiences and my education and my thoughts in a book. And if somebody finds that useful, then the book was worth writing. And if they don't, then I got less screen time with the TV and more on the computer trying to do some good. And that's all this is about. And if I make enough money once a month to take my wife out to dinner from selling a couple of books,
Perfect.
I did all right.
No, and that's what I hope too. And whenever I get to publish my book too here. So I just want to thank you for coming on the show today. This has been a great discussion. I really hope that people listen to it because I think this is an important conversation to have. And I think it's what's missing a lot from the current American culture is people just being able to have rational conversations versus sitting in our echo chambers and trying to destroy each other over things that don't really even exist in reality. So
Yeah, absolutely. Adam, thank you for having me on, and I wish you luck in your endeavors. And I hope we cross paths again soon.
awesome. Well, everybody, this has been Dr. Richard Hughbank, my former commander at the Air Force Academy. And thanks for joining us on Tuxes and Tomahawks this week. And we'll see you next time.